Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Please have your seats if you haven't. We're going to start. I can start this up. Thank you for joining us for this session of the Arab Water Conference, Session 3, Climate Change and Drought Management. My name is Teresa Wong, and I'm from the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, at the Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa based in Cairo. So I'd like to welcome you to this session. We have a very full list of speakers ahead, and this is a very exciting session because it also comes just less than 2 weeks after the end of COP27. So this is a really perfect forum for us to discuss water issues in adaptation, in climate action, post COP27, going towards the UN Water Conference in March next year, and also towards COP28. So this session is organized by all of us to address the scale of projected drought and water shortages in arid and semi-arid regions in the Arab region. The scale of the droughts that we're having today calls for water resources management to form a major part of the solutions to adapt to and mitigate climate change. So this session will review the status of knowledge and action on climate change impacts on water resources in the Arab region. It will also explore some of the available solutions that we will hear from our speakers today, and what is our roadmap and our actions to take forward some of these solutions, scale these up towards adaptation to address water scarcity while enhancing livelihoods and food security in the region. So I hope that as we start the session, you will think, along with all our speakers, what are some of the recommendations and initiatives for increasing regional cooperation on climate change in the region. I hope that you will also listen to some of these projects presented and think about how we can also scale these up in terms of the region, and make these more of a regional focus. I also like you to think, and if you have been engaged in some of the discussions on COP27, to also think about how we can take some of these messages and initiatives from COP27 onward to 2023. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, who is going to give our opening remarks, Dr. Abdul Hakim Alwar, the Assistant Director General and Resident Representative of the FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa, to give opening remarks.
Teresa, thank you very much. السلام عليكم جميعا، أسعد الله صباحكم ونحييكم ونرحب بكم في هذا الحدث. أنا عبد الحكيم الوعر، الممثل الإقليمي ومساعد مدير العام لمنظمة الأغذية والزراعة في إقليم الشرق الأدنى وشمال أفريقيا. أبدأ بالترحيب بالجميع في هذا الحدث الذي تنظمه منظمة الأغذية والزراعة في المكتب الإقليمي بالشراكة مع الشركاء في الإقليم من الجامعة العربية، جمهورية مصر العربية ممثلة في وزارة الموارد المائية والري، إيكاردا، الأكساد، وإسكوا، وكل الشركاء العاملين معنا في مجال تحديدا التغيرات المناخية وإدارة الموارد المائية. ربما قبل أن أبدأ في الكلمة الرئيسية، ومعذرة للترجمة لأني سأنقل من العربي إلى الإنجليزي، يجب أن نستذكر لحظات عودتنا من شرم الشيخ. العديد منكم كان متواجد خلال جلسات مؤتمر الأطراف المتعاقدة للاتفاقية الأممية والإطارية لتغير المناخ 27، وآخرين كانوا متابعين لهذه الجلسات. وهناك العديد من الحوارات التي تمت في هذا المؤتمر خلال الأسبوعين في مطلع هذا الشهر. وإن كان هناك تقدم في نقاشات وحوارات التغيرات المناخية، فكان هناك تقدم كبير جدا على صعيد إعطاء الأولوية لقطاعين مهمين جدا يتأثران بشكل مباشر بالتغيرات المناخية، ألا وهما المياه والغذاء. وهذا تطور كبير جدا لم يحصل بشكل واضح في السابق أو في مؤتمرات المناخ السابقة، حيث كان التركيز بشكل أكبر على الطاقة وعلى الحد من الانبعاثات. ونحن نعلم مأساة تغير المناخ العالمية، فاليوم نواجه حقيقة مثبتة في تقارير الاي بي سي سي في تغيرات المناخية أنه 20 دولة في العالم هي المسؤولة على 80% من انبعاثات الغازات الدفيئة، ويعاني باقي العالم التغيرات والتأثيرات ومؤثرات التغيرات المناخية. وبالتالي تبقى هذه الاجتماعات السنوية هي منصة للحوار ما بين جميع الأطراف للوصول إلى اتفاق في تحمل أعباء فاتورة التغيرات المناخية التي تؤثر اليوم بشكل مباشر على جميع الموارد المائية. حتى لا أبتعد على هدف هذه الجلسة، سأسلط الضوء على أهداف الجلسة وبعض الحقائق المتعلقة بآثار التغيرات المناخية على مناحي المياه والغذاء وسبل العيش في منطقتنا. The aim of this workshop mainly is to deal with two, I would say, interrelated and very critical threats. دكتور نصر معلش الترجمة. Two and very critical threats to the region, and we're talking about the Near East and North Africa region. We already know that the per capita availability of fresh water in the region has declined by 78% between 1962 and 2018. Vulnerability to food insecurity is rising not only due to the conflict or protracted conflicts in the region and global food crisis, but also due to the increase and frequency of the extreme events. And we have seen recently normally well rain-fed areas are facing droughts, whereas dry areas are facing floods. And those extreme events are increasing in frequency due to climate change. Drought is one of them, is one of the main crises. And thanks to the latest IPCC sixth assessment report, we know to a very high degree of certainty that drought will happen more and more often and put a strain on water shortages in the arid and semi-arid parts of the Arab region and push ecosystems past their limits. Now, as we speak, the League of Arab States is calling for a meeting on the 6th of December, next week, to highlight the impact of drought and possible famine in Somalia and the Horn of Africa region. And we are participating as FAO with the other UN agencies in this, what meant to be more of a pledging and resource mobilization conference for mobilizing resources to deal with the crisis. That's a direct implication of the climate change in the region that's mostly hit in the Arab region. And to make the situation more acute, only 5% of our total land area is arable. This means that agriculture and food systems, and indeed small-scale farmers, will be the hardest hit. They are the most vulnerable in the region. Agri-food systems provide employment for a large proportion of the rural population. This has serious implications for not just food security, but rural development, mobility, and stability. I would like to highlight some important facts that have happened over the last few years that especially the community that we have today need to pay interest in mobilizing efforts and expertise to make some change towards the sustainable management of water resources, dealing with climate change impacts, but also addressing food insecurity that's escalating. If we just go back a little bit, we had the COVID crisis that has led directly to a food crisis in terms of food prices increase. But then we also had last year the UN Food System Summit. And also we are preparing now for the UN Water System Summit or Water Sustainability Summit that will take place later this year. Only last week, FAO has hosted the Water Dialogue Forum in Rome in preparation for the World Water Summit that's going to take place this year on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Now, these events with the COP27 coming in between really bring the agenda of water and food and the climate at the top of today's discussions at all arenas. And it is the right momentum on addressing the issues today with our colleagues, all these issues, and come up with some recommendations that we can implement. Also, I don't want to forget that FAO has had a long partnership with the Swedish International Development Agency on the water accountability, productivity, and efficiency and sustainability in the Arab region, a project that's coming to, at least in its phase 1, to a conclusion by the end of this year, that has helped many of the countries in the region to develop well-thought policy informing data systems that would allow the countries to reshape their strategies and policies for the water management and managing their water resources. So these are all ongoing activities that we'd like to build on and capitalize to make some impact as we are seeing and feeling the impacts of the climate on water sector and food security. Ladies and gentlemen, this workshop comes less than 2 weeks after the close of the COP27. The Sharm el-Sheikh Climate Summit brought together governments to accelerate efforts to face the climate crisis together. At this year's COP, both water and food came out as top priorities. And I would like here to highlight that at FAO we held a workshop on pre-COP preparation where distinguished representatives from the different ministries in charge of climate, mainly from the water and agriculture ministries in the Arab region, has participated here in Cairo, and the FAO regional office organized that in preparing the delegations for COP27. And that's part of our role in making sure that they address the critical issues. Back at COP27, the Coronivia joint work on agriculture was the only agenda item that focused on the vulnerabilities of agriculture on climate change under UNFCCC. Now this will continue under the 4-year Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security. In the past few years, countries discussed best practices for climate resilient management of livestock, soil, water, and social and economic impacts of global warming. Now we are called upon to implement these in practice. There is a window of opportunity until March 2023 for parties, observers, and civil societies to shape and broaden this agenda for the next 4 years. My distinguished colleague here, Dr. Iman Al-Sayed, from the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, will probably share with you some exciting outcomes on water from COP27, which will also take us to the 2023 UN Water Summit and COP28. We have therefore an exciting opportunity, a golden moment before us in this session to review together what we know about climate change impacts on water resources in the Arab region. The session will also explore available solutions for the region, and we will try to address a very important question as how can we work together as a region to start implementing solutions to address water scarcity while enhancing livelihoods and food security in the Arab region. I thank you for being with us here today and look forward for the discussions and the recommendations that will come out from this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hakim, for those welcome remarks. So now we'll have a panel of speakers. I'm asking the speakers to please keep your presentations within 10 minutes, if preferably 8. I will be giving you a signal. If I start coming up on stage, this is a bad sign. Okay. I'd like to invite Dr. Iman Said Sulaiman, head of the planning sector in the Ministry of Water and Irrigation in Egypt, whom we've had the privilege to work with on the Water Pavilion, to give us a bit of a scene setting on some of the outcomes coming up from COP27.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Dr. Abdel Hakim, for this kind invitation to highlight the outcome of COP27 and actually the effort of Ministry of Water Resources and all the government of Egypt to have the water at the heart of the climate action. Unfortunately, maybe we have some problem with the font and the system, but maybe I can just start to talk about the numbers. Maybe I would like to share with you how was the big interaction between the international and the regional organization with the water pavilion, and we are happy here to have FAO as a main partner for the water pavilion, which already implemented in COP27, and we have more than about 4,000 persons attending in physical. They are able to participate and to talk about 10 thematic issues tackling the water and how we can relate water with climate actions. And we have very high level participation from different countries, and we are honored to have the hosting country for the midterm review conference, Tajikistan and Netherlands attending the opening of the water pavilion, as well as the Prime Minister of Egypt, which give us indication about how the water is highly reflected in the conference. I will start with Cairo Water Week last year, where we have also FAO and more than 20 organizations talk about the preparation for COP27 and what are the main issues to be reflected. We agreed to have the water pavilion. We have Water Day, and it was the first time for COP to have a full day dedicated for water, where we tackle a lot of issues, and we also have the water initiative aware. The water pavilion for me is the most attractive part of the activities, because we already are able to unify more than 40 organizations working around the world. So we have 5 continents represented in 200 meter area. They are meeting every day, talking about water and how we can make water at the COP agreement, and we end with a very concrete result. At the end, we have the water is mentioned in the cover of the agreement of the conference, and we are sure that our colleague next year, they are working to have concrete indicators and how we can reflect the water in all our activities related to climate. One of the most important issue in the water pavilion and also for the COP is you have more than 20 report and initiative launched in the pavilion. So not only a technical discussion, not only a gathering, but also we have important initiative focus on, if we are talking about implementation, finance, and also awareness, call for action on power of wetlands, and also we are talking about African cities for water adaptation. So we have many actions and many initiatives started and launched in the pavilion. So this is from the beginning was our aim from the pavilion to have some technical results, and also to have some climate negotiators, some politicians to attend and to hear the people who are working on water. And at the end also we have initiative to start working on the implementation in different areas. Also, one of the most important report was talking about soft launch of international panel on deltas and coastal area. As you may know, one of the great impact on water resources and coastal area is the increase of the sea level rise, and most of deltas will be impacted with such increase. And we have, with our colleague from Netherlands, issued this initiative, and I hope in future we will have a lot of actions to learn from our colleague in different countries and to start implementation to have safe coasts. Also, we have partnerships. We have partnership between British international investment and other countries. We have also a WARE initiative, which is promoted during the pavilion. We have call for ensuring access to climate resilient sanitation, which is the main issue of Africa. From the beginning, we call this is an African COP, and we try to reflect the African issues and the African problem related to safe drinking water and sanitation. We have also initiative regarding the investment for Africa for sanitation. So if we can talk about the importance of the outcome, we have concrete effective platform, which we have discussions, investment, and also actions. Some messages from the different days, as we have 10 days talking about different issues. Maybe we would like to highlight accelerating action for early warning, which is already the initiative for WMO, but we would like to have acceleration of this initiative, and we would like to have concrete outcome from this initiative to see some early warning activities in different areas. Also, we have transboundary and the international water cooperation, one of the main concern about the participants. So we have this message to be also reflected in the outcome document from the Water Pavilion to be presented in the UN report. So those messages, now we are working with our colleague either from FAO, from SIWI, from the 40 international organization to have a report demonstrating the voice of all water experts, and we would like to have those messages to be delivered to a UN conference. Also, we are talking about land and water governance should become more inclusive and adaptable. We are talking about innovation and modernization of water sector and how we can improve the financial flow. And also water should be acknowledged as an important key to achieving all SDGs. We are talking about enhancing collective actions for water-related disaster risk reduction and adaptation and resilience in context of river basin management. So those messages are from different areas, and we would like to work closely with our partners to have more maybe elaboration about how we can make those messages on action, and how to relate the main concern to action to start the implementation. Also, this is a decade for implementation and actions, not only initiative and conferences. We are talking about limited global warming and protecting biodiversity as supportive goals, urban resilience, depending on multi-stakeholder process. This is also, we have a very strong message, science-based tools that include measures for water resilience, contributing to adaptive climate framework are needed. So maybe in Africa and in Arab region, we would like to have more science-based solutions and tools to help us in different decisions. Maybe I'd like to highlight one of important example in Egypt, which is water accounting and how we can use science-based tool to help in water allocation, especially in the agriculture sector. So those messages are important, and translated the messages to action is also another important issue. Young people are motivated and engaged about finding solutions to water and the climate challenges, and we need to keep energy and inspiration of youth to be involved in the water management and water implementation. We are talking about water, energy, food, ecosystem nexus, which is a powerful concept to address interrelated natural global resources system to achieve social, economic, and environmental goals. Those are maybe a highlight about the main messages came out from the water pavilion, but I'd like to remind you the AWARE, which is water for action and water resilience, which is launched during COP27 and led by Egypt. We have the main partner, which is WMO. Now we are working in a roadmap to activate AWARE, and we have 6 work streams. I would like to have the interaction and engagement for different organizations. We would like to have for each work stream dedicated organization to work to have a concrete work plan for AWARE, and also to have an entity body to supervise the implementation to maximize the use either on the African context or on the Arab context. Cairo call for action, which include 5 actions. One of them is integrating water to climate, and AWARE is coming from this action. Another very important action, which is program for scarce countries. I'm sure our colleague in FAO can support in this action because they are leading the initiative for water scarcity. I don't like to take much time. I see Teresa raise the flags. I'm happy to reflect on the process of integrating climate and water activities and stand ready to respond to any question. And I'd like to invite you to visit our website for the MWRI to see more information about AWARE and Cairo Call for Action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iman. You so early in the session, you've already won the prize for sticking to time. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for also, I was really struck by the takeaway messages, how diverse they were, covering youth, land and governance, biodiversity. So that's, I'm sorry? I heard something in the back, but thank you so much for that presentation, and also for giving us maybe some of the next steps, hinting that AWARE is one of these initiatives that we might be able to join up and work with. And we'll get a chance to come back to this, as you say, because I think if we have time at the end for 20 minutes or so to address some questions, we'll take this back to COP27 and the UN Water Conference. So then the next presentation is by Dr. Carol Shoshani Shafan, Director, Arab Center for Climate Change Policies. She's the cluster leader, of course, from the Climate Change and Natural Resources Sustainability Cluster in ESCWA. And she will be giving a presentation on regional climate impacts on water and agriculture. Carol, please.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Thank you, FAO, for the invitation. Dr. Aman, we enjoyed being under your leadership at the COP Pavilion and indeed under Egypt throughout the COP. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the first segments of the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan coming out of COP27 talked about science, and a science-based approach for looking at what the impacts, what the disaster losses, what it means for countries of the region is fundamental for us to understand and address the climate change impacts. Because while there's mitigation goals to address, there's also adaptation threats, especially for a climate-scarce country as we are in. And that's why it's important to look at the global processes, like what the important work being done by the IPCC under their assessment report 6, to show what the impacts are going on globally. However, this very important atlas that exists and is often quoted internationally as a reference divides up our region in many, many parts. And if you can see from here, this is how the IPCC perceives the Arab region, which is not there, the Mashriq region, which is not there, and the Maghreb, which is part of basically the Mediterranean or Europe when we're looking. So the League of Arab States, as actually in preparation for COP13 back in 2007, actually asked, what does climate change mean for the Arab region? We were not very active as a region on climate change back a decade ago. There was a lot of concerns that it was all about mitigation, but really the story is a lot about adaptation in our region. And therefore, the Council of Arab Ministers responsible for the environment, and we're delighted to have Her Excellency the Minister with us and other ministers here from the environmental sector as well as the water sector here, to try to understand what it means for the Arab region. Because if you don't have a common assessment, you can't have a common dialogue, and you can't have common priorities for what it means for Arab positioning on climate change. And therefore, under the Ricard initiative, and I don't know why this is like this, and it's going to be a problem if all my slides are like this. في مشكلة? What's going on? Okay. Yeah, this is it. It's but all of them are like this. شوف شوفي لهيك. Okay, well, you're not going to get the text. لهيك. All right. Well, this is why under the Ricard initiative, which is the regional initiative for the assessment of climate change impacts on water resources and socioeconomic vulnerability in the Arab region, was set up so that regional climate modeling could be set up that allows a conversation to happen from Morocco to Oman, from the headwaters of the Tigris of Euphrates to the headwaters of the Nile. Because without a coherent understanding of what climate change means for us, it's very hard for us to speak together. And before this point, when we started this work about a decade ago, there were regional climate exercises going down for Jordan, for Egypt, but there was not an opportunity to talk about a regional perspective, which is what Teresa had mentioned in the beginning. To have regional cooperation, we need to have an informed regional knowledge base. And again, I apologize for the font. I've never had this happen to me before. You can see that the trends for the region show under the worst case scenario, which is the red one on the bottom, that temperatures can increase by up to 4.8 degrees by the end of the century. If there is positive efforts on mitigation, which is the 4.5 scenario in like that yellow stoplight approach, you can see that temperatures might increase by just 2.6 degrees Celsius by end of century. Now, if you think about it, the Paris Agreement and the global goal is talking about keeping 1.5 degrees alive and keeping 2 degrees as the official target by end century for the world. We are warming faster than the world. Actually, if you see right now, our temperature compared to the start of this century is already 0.8 degrees higher than it was 20 years ago. So climate change is real. This is not something we project. This is not something we're talking about a future. It is now. And that is why it's also so important that the action on disaster loss is important for our countries, especially the least developed countries and the most vulnerable among us. We are at a water conference, so I can't not showcase the changes in precipitation trends that are happening. Precipitation is very hard to model. There are variabilities that are happening because we can't think of only averages. We saw yesterday in Beirut storms, 50 centimeters of rain falling in an hour. And this is in Lebanon that is used to rain. Jeddah just last week was overrun by storm water. So we think about drought, those are climate extremes, but the capacity of our infrastructure to deal with these intense events has to be addressed, and this is where climate modeling and thinking about intensity and peaks and not only about averages is important. However, to show precipitation, you could see about the drawing going on in North Africa, what's happening around Iraq and the effect it's happening on the southern Mediterranean coast. Oh, this is ridiculous. What this is trying to show, which I will jump over, is that there are different ways and parameters that you could measure climate risk extremes, not only drought and flash floods, but also extreme indicators like the number of consecutive hot days or the number of consecutive wet days. And what that means for important sectors, not only health, but for agriculture. When you're having peaks that are hitting consistently 56 degrees Celsius in some parts of the area, like in Iraq and Kuwait, where we're seeing, what does that mean for agriculture productivity? So we also take out of our collaborative Ricard work these different indices, and I'm very pleased that we've now put as an indicator the number of days above 40 degrees Celsius, which no one else thinks about because it's a hot day in Europe when it's over 25. So looking at regional specific indicators is also very important as we move forward. Just to highlight for the researchers among you, we don't only work at the Arab region in Rikar, but we have a new set of modeling outputs to provide a science basis for the Mashriq, which again was not covered in that IPCC storyline, so that we can have outputs that look at a 10-kilometer scale, at a smaller area, and these are terabytes of data, by the way, that are generated with projections, to be able to see what climate change means for this area, in complementarity with work that is being done by Eurocordex in the Maghreb region. And we have reports, some are available in the back if they're not already done, that show not only averages, but looking at seasonality, and I encourage those policymakers among you and researchers to break down the time scale, because what it means for averages is not how we manage water and our resources, but what it means for seasons, snow melt, et cetera, and there's different ways to organize that information. And again, you can see the warming happening very evidently even across seasons in the area. So we take this and then go into vulnerability, and to get to the crux, as we are talking about water and agriculture, I'd like to share with you some of the vulnerability assessment outcomes that came out of Rikar, which are not impact assessment. You know, impact is biophysical. So what happens? The sun gets hot, the temperature gets warmer. What happens to a specific crop or the land or the rain that falls? Vulnerability deals with your capacity to cope with that environment. And vulnerability is really an economic and social dimension that complements the impact work. And so when we do integrated vulnerability assessments under Rikar, we look at the exposure, but we also link in the adaptive capacity. And in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, a lot of reference was made to adaptive capacity, coping capacity, in order to deal with these challenges for adaptation. So, oh my gosh. So when you look at the outcomes for the vulnerability assessment and the vulnerability of water availability by the end of the century, you're seeing, and I don't have the series of maps here, but just to give a visual, look how much darker and how much hotter the hotspots are, the red parts across the region, where we're seeing, you know, the southern rim, the Mauritania, the southern Sudan, Yemen, the coast of the Gulf, and also parts of the north, and of course what was just mentioned with Somalia being very affected from water availability as we move forward to the end of the century. We also have challenges related to the availability of water for crops specifically. And again, you see the red parts of the most sensitive parts in the region affected by water availability for crops based on the regional climate projections generated under Rikar. And again, very clear rims, and on the northern area showing sensitive areas. And kindly note that this is classified about the hotspots compared across the Arab region. It is not reference to global vulnerability assessments. It's a way that allows decision makers and policymakers in the Arab region to be informed about that regional cooperation and priorities and positioning that was mentioned earlier on. For livestock, we see a little bit lighter, but we can see very evidently where the challenges pose. And again, Somalia and southern Sudan being among the most affected, as well as Mauritania. And then you see also in parts of the northern Mashriq. And then all this had to do with environmental issues, but in the end, agriculture is so central for rural livelihoods in the region. We also have an assessment on the vulnerability of agricultural employment in the region, and look what will happen. There's massive areas that will be effective if adaptation measures and mitigation measures are not taken to respond to climate change challenges. And you see it coming all the way up through Egypt, of course, what would happen to agricultural employment. And this has particular implications for women that are taking a lot of the burden for agriculture in the region, especially with climate challenges happening. So while we look at the region, and the Arab region and the Mashriq region, we have been increasingly looking at the watershed level. And we've been very pleased to collaborate with the FAO, with ACSED, with funding provided by Sweden under the WEPS initiative to look at how vulnerability and impact assessment can be done at the basin level to have more project-related outcomes and intervention measures. So rather than looking at the policy implications of climate change, which is what Rikar at the Arab domain looks, getting into the project levels needs a little bit of a smaller scale, so extracting and building on that knowledge to look at what it means for the Al Jarwa watershed, for example, in Algeria, for Al-Nahr al-Kabir and Nahr al-Kalb, which are showcased on here, for vulnerability in those basins. And then we take those types of vulnerability assessments that were done with the ministries and with local stakeholders in those countries to then come out and understand agriculture productivity, such as the implications on apple production in Nahr al-Kalb, which is an area in Lebanon that is quite mountainous. It goes from the coast all the way to the snow-covered mountains, well, at least in the winter, of Lebanon, and then having that inform projects. Because in the end, what is being difficult is that the climate finance is being affected, is not coming through because the climate rationale for those projects are not coming through. And that's where we've been working to have those investment in measures, and then using the data to then create project profiles that can be used to expand upon, to have pre-feasibility studies, et cetera. Indeed, we worked with the COP presidency and the high-level champions, all the regional commissions in our 5 regions, to develop a compendium of projects based on the knowledge available and on a demand-driven basis that allows countries to identify projects that they would like to promote for climate action. This, for example, is a project proposed by Lebanon that came out of some of the analysis we did, and they've elaborated it further to talk about forest management. And this is part of this compendium and the projects that are put forth on our website that are attracting funding and interest from the banking sector and MDBs. So just to segue this as we wrap up, the reason that this is important is science is needed to provide the climate rationale for project preparation. But if the money's not there, nothing happens. So we have to really focus, and I think the COP27 was quite exceptional in highlighting the importance of mobilizing finance and mobilizing finance for adaptation as we move forward in the negotiations and in accelerating action. We see that in our region, only 11 Arab countries have actually costed their national needs for climate, which is a bit odd with the 21 countries. Only 11 have costed. Of that cost, they're asking for, collectively, what's articulated, $570 billion. That's definitely not what we need. It's much more. But from what is officially on the books, what we can cite is $570 billion. Of that, we're not even getting 60 million, and quite honestly, the money we're getting for climate tagging, it was only 34 million. And the share of that is what is really troubling for this audience, because only a third is going for water and agriculture. The rest is going for mitigation. So if water and agriculture and loss and damage and water security and water scarcity are the priorities, the funding envelope has to be flipped, and this type of information is evident to help us move forward. Through our RICAR partnerships and the LAS, ACSA, the League of Arab States, the countries, the Arab Ministerial Water Council, which oversees RICAR, are all working together to provide that science base through RICAR, through this partnership. We have a knowledge base available through ricar.org where you can access all the data for free and ask for data and maps that can help you prepare projects or research. There's actually over 200 publications that already reference the work being done on RICAR. The Knowledge Hub is hosted at FAO for the Arab Hub, where you can visualize the data outcomes. And at ESCWA, we host the Mashreq Hub, where again, you can identify the indicators that come out and also request data that might help you. And we thank all our partners for helping make this a reality to better inform climate action in the Arab region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carol, for this very important presentation. I mean, reminding ourselves that this was the outcome of a request from the League of Arab States and the Arab states on better climate data, the kind of resolution that we need. And so this is the kind of session where we also will have to reflect on what is the science that we need to do the work that we want to do to put water as a funded priority in adaptation. So thank you very much for this, and I think a very, very, very good kind of point of reflection. Moving forward to the implications of all this on food systems and agriculture, we have Mr. Jean-Marc Forez, Regional Program Leader for the FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa, who will talk about some of this and food systems. If we've got the loaded. All right, Jean-Marc. Are you speaking from there? Okay. And apologies for all the windings in the presentations. The messages are coming through very clearly in spite of all that.
Good morning, and I was really wondering what am I going to say if I see these characters. So we will discover together. I took my phone and maybe I'll try to remember what I tried to put on those slides. I'm really pleased because the sequence of presentations fall very well. We heard now, we heard everything about the COP and we heard the impact and going into vulnerability and the importance of addressing these vulnerabilities. The focus on my presentation will be on agri-food system solutions for a better climate in the region. So I'll have the opportunity to dig a little bit more into what should be done. Starting with looking at what is in the NDC analysis for the countries of the region, 94% of the countries in the region report climate-related impact on agroecosystems, and 81% report food insecurity and malnutrition as a risk related to climate. And you can see on this graph how the different elements, the different types of impact have been classified and have been mentioned by different countries with, for instance, loss of productive infrastructure and asset, adverse health issues, food insecurity and malnutrition coming very high in the list of possible impacts. We are talking about water here. There is such a close linkage between water and agriculture and food security in this region, and you see very similar number of percentage, 94% of NENA countries referring water stress and climate-related slow onset on event, and 86% including water resources as a priority area for adaptation. I don't think in this room today anybody doubts about this, with the focus here on some actions related to the need to improve irrigation and drainage, water storage and harvesting, water use efficiency, and then all the way through desalination, flood management, etc. But we want to broaden from the classical agriculture to a vision related to agri-food systems, because we believe it's really important to tackle the problem in a holistic way. So when you go down from the production outside of what we call the farm gate into the food system, you see a major issue related also to emissions. The global food systems are responsible for 21 to 37% of total greenhouse gas emission, which is really a very large amount. We do need it to eat, but we need to eat in a greener way and in a way that affects less climate change. The sources of greenhouse gas emission across the agri-food system is in the production, is in land use change, but it is also in activities along the value chain, the processing, the packaging, the distribution, the preparation, but also in particular all the losses and waste along the food chain that represent wasted opportunities. Every kilo of food that is lost or wasted is food that has required resources to be produced. And looking at efficiency in agriculture, we are very good at looking at water efficiency, for instance. The efficiency also needs to be looked at along the food chain. Maybe the easiest solutions may not be at the production level, but down the road in terms of food systems. So 50% of the countries do include mitigation measures in agriculture, forest and land use in their first round of NDCs. So this is a sign that while here in this region we do have to focus on adaptation, we cannot forget mitigation. So we are familiar, we use this wording climate smart agriculture, or in this case I would like to speak of climate smart agri-food systems, where we manage to sustainably increase agricultural productivity and incomes, at the same time adapt and build resilience of food systems, and then reduce and remove greenhouse gas emission. And here we have a very interesting situation where some agricultural practice can really be carbon negative. So we do have, agriculture does have opportunities to contribute to mitigation, very serious one. It's very important to, in particular when we speak about agriculture, to remember how site-specific the solutions are. So climate-smart agri-food systems is a more of a principle, but then you need to look at the specifics of different sites and decide what technologies and practices are most suitable to different situations. And here we see more and more in our program, but I think in the program of all the countries and our partners, these options adopted for more climate resilient and climate smart agriculture. And here you have a long list, I think practically all the countries of the region in which we have embarked with the support of a funding agency like GEF and the GCF for more climate smart agriculture practices. Just examples, and this is related to the fact that the issues are very much site-specific. We just issued a report called Towards Climate Smart Agriculture in Egypt, pointing at some options to transform our system towards more climate smart system, and I'll let you look at those. As we are in Egypt, of course, the irrigation dimension is extremely important. Are there examples in Syria working towards a spineless cactus cultivation for livestock fodder, sustainable feed during drought spell? The livestock issue cannot be underestimated in terms of livelihood support in our country. Or hydroponic feed production, also the case of Iraq here. Now, this was very much a production type of action, but I mentioned we want to look across the food system. And here we need to work at the level of policy, strengthening coordination, of course. We do have developed and work a lot now on food loss and waste reduction at the level of the policy, knowledge building, advocacy, capacity building, and promoting good practice with an increasing number of areas and countries where this is being applied. Food loss and waste, I mentioned this. Here are a few numbers. 11% of food produce is lost in the NANA, and then the number can go to more than 40% for perishable products. And you can see here that there is a lot of opportunities for reduction. The solutions include first understanding, measuring, assessing the scales, analyzing the implications of the different solutions against the three pillars of sustainability, and coordinating action along the food chain to find solutions for reduction of food loss and waste. And on the right you can see the whole from reduction at source to food distribution, animal feed, and then recycling, composting, etc. All areas where we can make the difference. So, as a conclusion, a few points. Agri-food systems have major contribution in global emission, but are also extremely vulnerable, in particular in our region. Climate smart agri-food systems offer significant opportunities both for mitigation and for adaptation, but this requires applying climate assessments that consider the impact of mitigation and adaptation policies across all the agri-food system actors, adopting multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approaches, because we know that in many cases we will have to deal with trade-offs, and here issues like adopting nexus approaches. We know the very famous nexus, agriculture, food, energy, climate, and others that are absolutely necessary. We cannot anymore work on a sectoral basis. Incorporating consideration of agri-food system into the NDCs and the NAPs, and then designing science-based policies and solutions to shift towards climate-smart agricultural practices, focusing in our region on water and for climate-resilient production, addressing inefficiencies across the whole food. On production, we'll focus a lot on water, but not only. In the food system, we'll focus a lot on energy, but not only. Ensuring access to sustainable energy across the system, and that really has an impact on reducing food loss and wastes. And then also looking at the level of the nutrition, because there are options for a win-win here by getting healthier diets for more sustainable food systems that need to be affordable and accessible to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc, for that presentation. Yeah, so one of the things that came up also on your slide is that this region prioritizes a lot in their NDCs concerns over migration and displacement and climate, especially for climate-induced displacement. So I think this is very suitable that we're going on to the Arab Water Council now. Dr. Amel Azab, from Project Coordinator of the SDG Climate Facility from AWC, who will give the next presentation. I think, I'm trying to see if this is the one. We're trying to load up.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be here in this important session and to present the Arab Water Council. Apologies from Dr. Walid Abdurrahman. He couldn't make it to this session, but I will be honored to present on behalf of the Arab Water Council. I'm going to talk about climate security, which is another dimension that is important to focus on, I think, in our discussion today. To start by an introduction that we may all are aware of, but we need to stress on it, that climate-related disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity, negatively affecting development pathways, and we have seen from the earlier presenters a lot of information dealing with this issue. Climate change is a complex hazard threat to livelihoods, to resources, to human security, to economics. Climate change aggravates and multiple the intense challenges and threats that you are facing. The Arab region is facing a lot of threats, and just part of these I wanted to share with you. We have increased population that sometimes we don't focus on, but it is one of the important threats. Decrease in food security, extreme aridity, and we are almost a very arid region in the world. High vulnerability of drought, desertification, water scarcity and stress in most of countries in our region. Forced induced migration, and this is an important issue that was just highlighted in the last presentation, and also economic loss and war and conflicts, social vulnerability, which is an important issue. I will stress on it in my presentation. Gender inequality threats is also another dimension. Climate change as a threat to livelihoods is very well obvious, but we have to identify an important aspect, which is that we have a major gap regarding the need for strengthening intersectoral linkages when you talk about climate change between different sectors and to more holistically and more effectively support the implementation of the SDGs. So we don't tackle any more climate change in relation to water or food or social aspects, but in an integrated way dealing with all these issues. And this is the reason I'm going to talk about climate security. Actually, climate security initiative was adopted by the League of Arab States with the support of the Arab Water Council and World Food Programme in early 2015. But we started to focus more on how we can define climate security and how we can move forward to take actions to ensure climate security in the Arab region. This definition that I'm showing was a definition that came out of a regional dialogue that was conducted between different partners in the region, involving different country representatives, different organizations, where we discussed what can be the climate security and how we can define it. And we reached this, that climate security as a new concept is used to describe and understand the combined impacts of climate-related change on natural resources, ecosystems, socioeconomic aspects, political stability of the countries, and therefore of the whole region. And also through taking the initiative of climate security, we aim to emphasize the catalytic effect of climate-related change as a risk multiplier, as I mentioned earlier, that can lead to multiple threats to the humans living in our region. This definition was an important basis for us to start to develop further activities and research on climate security. I just would like to show here the key pillars that the Arab Water Council is dealing with in all our research and capacity development activities, and also our work to support policy development in the region. And one of our key pillars is addressing climate security and its impacts on water resources, on food security, on social dimensions, ecosystems, and even beyond. I'm going to talk specifically on our activities in relation to climate security. After defining the climate security, the SDG Climate Facility project came up as a joint action between different partners in the region, the Arab Water Council and other UN partners, to develop an initiative where we can establish SDG Climate Facility for the Arab region to scale up innovative finance and partnerships to support the Agenda 2030 and also its goals, and to target implementing the Paris Agreement and Sendai framework. So we try to integrate the different initiatives, global initiatives, to have a more secure Arab region in relation to different climate impacts. This project have many partners, as I mentioned. Arab Water Council, of course, the League of Arab States is supporting this project and one of the key partners. UNDP, a World Food Programme, and many other UN organizations. And of course, it is supported and funded by SIDA, Swedish fund. We have different outcomes for this project. Just would like to highlight that there is an outcome enhancing the knowledge and coordination between different players dealing with climate impacts in the region, but also enhancing the access to analysis, tools, and strategies, and strengthening national and local capacities. This project actually is a huge project. A lot of partners are developing different activities, but the ultimate target was strengthening the national and local capacities through country grant projects that were given to several countries in the region to implement solutions on the ground to combat climate change impacts. I will just focus on some of the examples, what we are doing at the Arab Water Council in collaboration with partners under this project. I will try to be very quick. Thank you for the note. My talk is about climate change and social vulnerability, and I'm very happy to be maybe in the right sequence, because we heard from Dr. Carroll about RICAR and the great initiative of RICAR to map the risks in the region, in the whole region, but our focus is on communities. So when we started to tackle social vulnerability, our focus was to go into community level and to map the vulnerability, the social vulnerability on community level. This is one of the first studies that we are conducting under the SDG project, which is climate change impact on social vulnerability, specifically using compound indicators to assess drought impact. So our hazard here in this study is the drought. We have several objectives out of this study. I will just maybe get a couple of them and move forward directly to the next slide. Important thing is to analyze social vulnerability indicators under climate change risk in the Arab region. So our target is the community level in all the Arab region. At the end, we want to support communities to find solutions on the ground. So this is the main target, and also to formulate policy tools and recommendations to support the implementation of actions on the ground. I will try to move very quickly. As you may have seen before, our conceptual approach is not different from other approaches. We focus on vulnerability, including exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, but also our multiplying hazard here, as I mentioned, was drought. It can be floods, it can be any disaster that can face the Arab countries. Very quickly, the idea about the project is that we have a first level finding, mapping the exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Our case study was in Jordan. So you see now the map of Jordan. This was the first country that we focused on. And our target was not only Jordan, but to focus on communities. So I will try to move quickly to show you the result. I know I don't have enough time. The second level of findings is to multiply the vulnerability and hazards. Mapping both and multiplying both can give us at the end the risk map that we intend to have. This is the ultimate result of the study, which is the risk map in Jordan in relation to social vulnerability. I think we had like more than 50 indicators that we have been working on. And very quickly, I will show the demonstration case study, which was one of the areas in Jordan, which is Dir el-Kaf. And we selected this area because it's one of the maybe the poorest areas in Jordan. It's not the highest social vulnerable area, but it's one of the poorest, and this is the reason we selected it. And also because we had base data to go to the field and to get and complement the database existing. Very briefly, as I mentioned, Deir el-Kahf is facing poverty, more than 96% when we had our field work. We conducted field work with 50, I think 50 families in the village, and we started to develop and map the social vulnerability aspects. I will move very quickly, sorry, I'm taking more time, but I still have a lot to share. This is one of the result maps. This study is a huge study. It is conducted also in collaboration with World Food Programme and UNDP Regional Office in Amman, and with the Ministry of Water Resources in Jordan, and many other partners are contributing to this study. I will skip this, sorry, but we had a lot of communication with the communities, discussing with them the problem, and we even got from them ideas for solutions. So it's very important to lead to communities when we want to have real solutions to combat climate change on the ground. We had an important policy dialogue at the end of this study to discuss with the community representatives that we have been working with them the whole time. And the result is that we are going to develop a second phase of the study to start implementing solutions on the ground with the different ministries. These findings were presented during COP27 in a session where we wanted to highlight the importance of studying social vulnerability. Trying to move forward, another important study that we are conducting is focusing on climate change disasters, flood impacts, and risk management in the MENA region with a case study in Sudan. And the key important goal of this study, again, is to focus on communities, to develop policies to support community resilience to combat climate change. And in this case, we have been focusing on the floods existing in Sudan. And there is a big report that's going to be published very soon of 5 volumes specifically for this study. I will try to run. I'm very sorry. I have a lot of information that I would like to share with you. This is another study. Tomorrow we are going to present on it. It's related to gender migration induced by climate change. A very important result out of the project of SDG Climate Facility is that we developed the Climate Security Network. So we can try to enhance the collaboration between different organizations in the region to focus and advocate on climate security and its importance. I will try to move forward, but a lot of partners are already members of this network. Our idea is to focus on different studies that can support climate security initiative in the region, but also to support capacity development, to support youth, and to get more membership to advocate for climate security. I'm trying to move very quickly. Thank you very much. I will stop here. A lot of information is on the website. Please share with us, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I took more time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amel, for that, and thank you for speeding through. And I hope I didn't look so threatening with the A4 piece of white paper that everybody seems to be very afraid of. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive presentation. We've definitely moved far away from climate change impacts to adaptive capacity, to resilience, food security, and tackling some of the vulnerabilities. So I think there's a lot of advancement in this work. I think we have a lot of meat for thinking about some of these solutions to be scaled up, and also another great an example of a regional project, a regional program. So moving on. I think right now we're on track. We're on good track for a good amount of time for questions, and we might be able to take some from the audience as well. So, the next presentation from Dr. Kasem Natouf, who's hydrogeologist at the Arab Center for Studies of Arid Zones and Drylands, to give a presentation on the very important topic of groundwater resources and certain innovative solutions. Thanks.
يعطيكم العافية. برحب فيكم متحدثين وحضور. برحب بسيادة المدير العام لإكساد على الأسوة في الإكساد هون. ما عندكم مشكلة فونتات، عملت كونكشن للكمبيوتر اللي عندي، فرح أحكي باللغة العربية. الموضوع رح أحكي عن التغيرات المناخية وتأثيرها على الموارد المائية الجوفية، لأنه الموارد المائية الجوفية دائما ما بتاخذ حقها من النقاش غالبا لأنها غير مرئية. كل الحديث بنلاقيه على درجات الحرارة، بنلاقيه على الهطولات المطرية، لكن على الموارد المائية الجوفية نادرا لحتى ما نلاقي دراسات وأبحاث بتخص هالموضوع هذا. رح يكون مخطط الحديث عندي على السريع تغير بقيم الهطولات المطرية. رح أحكي شوي عن الموارد المائية غير متجددة والمتجددة. رح أعرض بعض نتائج مخططات لنماذج مناخية حدثت على أو أجريت على تأثير التغيرات المناخية على المياه الجوفية رح أحكي عن تجربة بأكساد حصلت عن النمذجة الرياضية للمياه الجوفية وتأثير التغيرات المناخية عليها. طيب هلا هذه التغيرات ريكار كلياتنا سمعنا عنه، حتى المتحدثين قبلي تحدثوا عنه، عن الهطولات المطريه. هي بالقيم المرجعيه، هي تغيرات بالهطولات المطريه. رح نلاحظ بكل التغيرات انه في عندنا انخفاض بقيم الهطولات المطريه، هي قيمه وسطى لعده نماذج مناخيه. ايضا بنلاقي هيك كمان قيمه وسطى في عام 2046 الى 2065 بمنتصف القرن، كمان قيمه وسطى من 2081 ل 2100. كل الحديث بيتحدث عن انخفاض بالهطولات المطريه في المنطقه العربيه. اذا ملامح التغير، الهطولات المطريه تاثيرها على المياه الجوفيه انه هي المورد الرئيسي، هي المغذي الرئيسي للمياه الجوفيه. طيب على السريع، الموارد المائية الجوفية بنقسمها لقسمين: موارد متجددة بتجينا كل سنة نتيجة الهطولات المطرية، وبتجينا موارد مائية جوفية غير متجددة، هي اللي تشكلت من آلاف السنين ضمن باطن الأرض. في عندنا بالمنطقة العربية الكثير منها. فينا نحكي عن الخزان النوبي في السودان، فينا نحكي في في صحراء الكبرى في جنوب الجزائر، حتى في الدمام في السعودية، في الأحواض المائية العميقة. اللي عم بحكي عن الموارد المائية غير المتجددة لأنها هي رح تكون صمام الأمان في حالة حدوث الكثير من حالات الجفاف. في حالة عدم وجود في الهطولات المطرية رح نلجأ لهذه الموارد المائية الجوفية العميقة لحتى نحصل على المياه وحتى نأمن احتياجاتنا المائية. هون عم أعرض فقط أنه في سوريا مثلا في شرق البحر الأبيض المتوسط الخزان المائي الجوفي العميق على عمق حوالي 1000 متر هو الخزان الرئيسي اللي رح يكون يمدنا بالمياه في حالات الجفاف الشديدة. هون بهذيل رح أعرض عليكم نتائج النموذج المناخي اسمه ووتر جاب. هذا النموذج المناخي تم إعداده في معهد جوتي بميونخ. النموذج المناخي بيعطي قيم تغذية المياه الجوفية اللي بدها يتوقعوها لعام 2070. المتوقع لعام 2070 قيم تغذية المياه الجوفية. نحن أخذنا هذا النموذج المناخي هو لكل العالم، قسينا المساحة على مساحة الوطن العربي، ووزعنا قيم تغذية المياه الجوفية إلى قيم نادرة وقيم موجودة. يعني في حالات بيكون فيها الوطن العربي لا يوجد فيها تقريبا تغذية مياه جوفية، وفي مساحات ضمن الوطن العربي يوجد فيها مياه جوفية. حسبنا النسب المئوية كيف عم تتغير من المساحات المغطاة سواء بالتغذية الموجودة أو بالتغذية النادرة. رجعنا بالتغذية الموجودة وزعناها لأربعة أقسام. في عندنا تغذية منخفضة ومتوسطة وعالية. بنلاحظ انه النسب المئويه لمساحه الوطن العربي في عام 2010 بنلاقي انه التغذيه النادره قليله، التغذيه الموجوده عاليه. اما في عام بنلاقي في 2010 هون التغذيه نادرة والتغذية الموجودة من يعني مساحتها زايدة. لكن في عام 2041 بنلاقي تغذية منخفضة، التغذية الموجودة في عام 2070 رغم انه زادت قليلا عن عام 2041، لكن بنلاحظ انه التغذية المرتفعة في عام 2070 في المنطقة العربية رح تغيب تماما. ما رح يكون في عندنا مناطق تتغذى بالمياه الجوفية. هذا التوزع مساحي للنموذج GFDL وتوقعات تغذية المياه الجوفية في عام 2010 و2041 و2070. بنلاحظ كيف انه المساحات هون مثلا في المغرب رح تغيب فيها التغذية. في عندنا بعض المساحات اللي كان فيها تغذية مثلا ايضا هون بمنطقة الفرات ومنطقة شرق المتوسط رح تكون هون في مساحة في 2070 غايبة تماما التغذية الموجودة. ايضا نموذج مناخي اخر هاد جيم 2. المهم انه بنلاحظ انه التغذيه موجوده عم تنخفض. هون التغذيه الموجوده عم تنخفض، وايضا مساحات وقيم التغذيه النسب المئويه بهذه المساحات عم تنخفض اكثر. كل النماذج المناخيه هي كمان نماذج مناخيه اخرى. هاد جيم 2 تمثيل المساحي له. بنلاحظ انه قيم التغذيه بالمنطقه العربيه تغذيه المياه الجوفيه حسب الووتر جاب تنخفض. ايضا الاي بي اس ال نموذج اخر. كل النماذج المناخيه اللي درسناها واخذنا مساحتها بنلاحظ انه هذا نموذج بيقول انه التغذيه الموجوده بالمنطقه العربيه بنلاحظ هون رح تنخفض مساحتها الى يعني تقريبا فقط 1% من المنطقه العربيه. وفق هذا النموذج سيوجد فيها تغذيه للمياه الجوفيه. ايضا اي بي اس ال توزع المساحي له بعرضه عليكم هون الميرو. كل النماذج لما شفناها ما رح استعرضها بالتفصيل وحده وحده، كل النماذج رح نلاقيها انه هي بتتحدث عن انخفاض تغذيه المياه الجوفيه. طيب هذا نموذج الووتر جاب. ايضا لو حصلنا على التغيرات الزمنيه، السلسله الزمنيه في منطقه الرياض، بنلاقي التغذيه بين ال 81 و 2010 كانت عم تزداد، بين ال 41 وال 70 رح تنخفض حسب السلسله الزمنيه. ايضا السلسله الزمنيه في منطقه عمان في الاردن كانت عم تزداد، هون يعني رح تنخفض وان كان يعني ما هو واضح لانه مقياس العمل. هون في منطقة طرابلس بليبيا أيضا كانت عم تنخفض بين 81 و 2010، وأيضا عم تنخفض بين 41 و 2070. في منطقة تونس في العاصمة الانخفاض رح يكون شديد هون بعام 2041 2070. أنا عم أتحدث عن قيم تغذية المياه الجوفية المتوقعة بعام 41 و 70. أيضا في منطقة وزان في المغرب بنلاحظ الانخفاض هون عنا. طيب المياه الجوفية ما رح تتأثر فقط من ناحية التغذية، أيضا رح تتأثر من ناحية نوعية المياه الجوفية. في عندي هذا الشكل مثلا، نوعية المياه الجوفية بتجينا من 5 أو من 6 مصادر. المصادر الرئيسية اللي ممكن أنها تتأثر بالتغيرات المناخية هي التملح نتيجة العمليات الزراعية، لأنه رح يصير في عنا زيادة في الطلب على الزراعة، زيادة في استهلاك المياه، زيادة في استهلاك المسمدات والأسمدة الزراعية. راح يكون في قيمة وتراكيز المواد اللي عم ترشح للمياه الجوفية راح تكون أكبر. أيضا في عنا زيادة بدرجات الحرارة، في عنا 1.5 درجة اللي كنا عم نحكي عنها. هي زيادة بدرجات الحرارة رح تؤدي إلى زيادة التبخر من سطح المياه الجوفية، وأيضا عنا تداخل مياه البحر مع المياه الجوفية. النمذجة الرياضية للمياه الجوفية هي الحل. ليش؟ لأنها هي بتمكننا أنه نتوقع كل المكونات اللي بتأثر على تشكل المياه الجوفية، بتعطينا إمكانية ننمذجها، بتعطينا إمكانية لحتى ننمذج على فترة سلسلة زمنية، وبالتالي نحن بنقدر نتوقع إلى 100 سنة أو أكثر حتى، وبتعطينا إمكانية أنه نتحكم بالمقياس اللي بدنا نشتغل فيه حسب حجم أو مساحة الخلية اللي عم نستخدمها. بأكساد نحن عملنا نموذج بالتعاون مع الإسكوا لحوض دبدبة بين كربلاء والنجف. عملنا نموذج رياضي، طبقنا الهطولات المطرية والرشح من الهطولات المطرية تغذية المياه الجوفية على النموذج الرياضي، وتوقعنا كيف تتغير مناسيب المياه الجوفية وكيف تتغير تغذية المياه الجوفية والموازنة المائية لعام 2070. هاي الشبكة اللي أنشأناها للنموذج. هون عم أعرض بعض نتائج النموذج. مثلا هون هاي بعض نتائج النموذج. دائما في عنا هبوطات بمناسيب المياه الجوفية. بنتيجة النموذج اقترحنا بعض المقترحات على الزملاء في العراق من أجل التكيف مع التغيرات المناخية اللي توقعناها في حوض دبدبة، وهي دائما هي واجب المنمذج الرياضي للمياه الجوفية. في النهاية يعني بحب فقط أضيف إنه نحن في أكساد في عنا نماذج رياضية كتير متعددة اشتغلناها، في بعضها كنت أنا مشارك، في بعضها كنت حتى منمذج. هاي التعدادات فقط للنماذج وبعض الأمثلة على العمل اللي قدمناه في النمذجة الرياضية للمياه الجوفية، وشكرا لكم.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kassem, for that presentation, showing that we are already working together to put together the data, climate projections, and those impacts on certain things like groundwater resources. And you spoke about the availability of a lot of these models to support the countries in this work, going back to, again, the importance of a scientific approach from the very start. Thank you so much for that. Our final, again, the last but not least speaker, before we go into a couple of minutes of Q&A, we have Dr. Mohialdin Omar, who leads the water research in irrigated agriculture team in the soil, water, and agronomy section of ICARDA, giving a presentation, I think, on climate smart irrigation.
Okay, thank you. So I would start my presentation from the takeaway messages that Dr. Iman Said presented earlier today. Takeaway messages from COP27 is specifically about the science-based tools. So this presentation, I think, would explain how science-based tools would make a difference on the farm level. So as all of you know that there is a serious water crisis in the MENA region. MENA region is the most water scarce region in the world. And all about inefficient irrigation, especially that the largest water consumer in the region is agriculture. You can find so many examples of how countries suffering from limited renewable water resources, and on the other side, dramatic increase on the demand pressure. For example, we can find that it's predicted that desertification in Syria would reach to 60% of the country. In Saudi Arabia, for example, a depletion of 2/3 of groundwater supply has been observed, and in the United Arab Emirates, the water table drops is expected by 1 meter per year. So as you can see, that all is about inefficient irrigation. That's why transformative actions should be in place to have a precision irrigation on the farm level. But how to achieve precision irrigation? To answer these questions, let me take you very quickly to the principles of irrigation scheduling. As all of you know that the main purpose of irrigation is to make sure that the soil moisture in the root zone is sufficient for the plant to grow. And as you can see in this green area, this is the safe soil moisture. The amount of water in the root zone that should be available in order to make sure that plant can grow. So below the threshold of deficit, so water stress might be expected. And above this field capacity, for sure irrigation stress is expected. So usually when we irrigate, the soil moisture increase to a little above field capacity, and then the water is lost by drainage and evapotranspiration, and then irrigation is applied again, and so on. And usually the time duration between two irrigation events is interval. So actually we have sometimes long interval and sometimes we have short intervals based on many factors. The most important three factors: soil water holding capacity, crop growth stage, and the climate conditions. So for example, in case of heavy soil such as clay, for example, longer intervals might be applied. But in case of light soil such as sand, which has low soil water holding capacity, shorter intervals must be applied. For crop growth stage, also in initial growth stages, the plant cannot stay for long without irrigation. That's why shorter intervals should be applied. But for older plants, longer intervals might be applied. And finally, for example, if there is any kind of heat waves, so shorter intervals in this case should be applied. So as you can see that irrigation scheduling should be dynamic and site-specific, rather than the current generalized traditional irrigation scheduling scheme. Usually, the traditional irrigation scheduling worldwide is based on ET, as you know. Evapotranspiration is different from one crop to another, from one area to another. But usually, the most important factor that ignored under drought conditions is KS, or water stress coefficient, because usually water stress coefficient equals to 1, but this in case of normal conditions. But if the soil moisture below the threshold of deficit, in this case the KS becomes less than 1, and that's why the estimated evapotranspiration is less than the actual evapotranspiration. So from such conditions, it's very important to set precision irrigation. How to achieve precision irrigation? So actually, ICARDA and CGIR, in collaboration with our partners, have been contributing to set some solutions, some innovative solutions. The first approach, proximal thermal imaging-based irrigation. So actually, this approach is based on detection of the relationship between water stress and the leaves temperature or canopy temperature. Because usually when there is water stress, the plants start to close its stomata and reduce evapotranspiration as some kind of adaptation to water stress conditions. And as you know, that evapotranspiration is the main reason of cooling. And that's why in this case, or in water stress conditions or under drought conditions, the temperature of leaves increase. So this approach is based mainly on the difference between leaves and the air temperature. Actually, as you know, that any interventions or any new science-based solutions need some kind of proving the concept. So we have proved the concept of proximal thermal imaging-based irrigation in Egypt in different sites for different crops, wheat, faba bean, and barley, and under different conditions, under different meteorological and agroeconomic conditions, climatic conditions, and also with different irrigation systems such as drip, sprinkler, and surface irrigation system. Actually, the system or the technique or the approach is very simple. It's just based on proximal thermal imaging and then thermal analysis of captured images, and then finding the correlation between temperatures of leaves or canopy and reliable indicators such as relative water content and soil moisture. And determining thresholds of soil moisture, threshold to start irrigations of relative water content and soil moisture, and also finding the corresponding threshold of temperatures. Some results very quickly can be shown here. For example, results of Wadi Natron area for wheat in Egypt. So it has been observed that the temperature increase when there is a decline in applied irrigation water amounts. You can see here also an inverse correlation between the temperature on one side and relative water content and soil moisture on the other side. Here you can see the threshold to start irrigation, which is 0.5 in case of wheat under new reclaimed conditions in Egypt. Also, there is another way to try to set precision irrigation to improve the ET estimation method. Actually, FAO, in collaboration with ICARDA, has established and have been operating a regional network of ET in order to test different ET field methods, and also to calibrate the remote sensing to apply such method on the larger scale for informed decision making on agricultural water management. Also, there is a way, as we explained in the very beginning, that soil moisture is the main indicator that can determine the decision of irrigation, and that's why there is another method based on direct soil moisture detection, simply by letting the sensor, the soil moisture sensor, sending and transferring data, and based on the threshold to start irrigation, the irrigation can be taken immediately. Actually, some factors should be considered when using these methods, because threshold to start irrigation is different from one crop to another, and also from one soil type to another, and also for different growth stages. For example, field capacity, permanent wilting point, and total available water is based on the soil, whether it's clay or sand or whatever. To determine exactly the percentage of readily available water, to determine the threshold, is based on the crop type. And finally, where exactly to embed the soil sensor in the soil is based on the growth stage. Yeah. For example, for initial growth stage, the soil sensor should be embedded in the first 15 centimeters of the top soil layer. And the effective rooting depth is different from one growth stage to another, until we reach, for example, the final growth stage. So the soil moisture sensor in this case should be embedded in between 45 to 60 centimeters. So again, as we said in the beginning, that the takeaway message to support the science-based tools is very important for water resilience, especially under drought conditions. And precision irrigation is very important to be applied and skilled, because precision irrigation delivers water exactly what and when is needed. Actually, precision irrigation achieved optimal growing conditions for higher yields with water, fertilizer, energy saving. Irrigation scheduling should consider soil water holding capacity, growth stage, and the climate conditions should be dynamic and site-specific as possible. Precision irrigation scheduling can be achieved by different science-based tools on the farm level, such as proximal thermal imaging-based irrigation, direct soil moisture-based irrigation scheduling, and finally improved ETE. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. If I were to give out prizes, you would get one as well for being on time and for being patient with us as our last but not least speaker. So thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for that, and for reminding us that there's also a lot of work on the kind of good practices for irrigation and for water management under different growth conditions and definitely under different climate conditions that we can tap on this very rich repository of work that's being done. So now we have slightly over 10 minutes before the close, and I don't want to keep you from a coffee break or lunch. I want to give, while I ask the audience for maybe 2 questions, if hands up first if you want to ask a question. I would also at the same time ask our panelists to reflect on this one question of what can we do this year to help our water and climate communities work to address some of these takeaway messages, to address some of the needs arising, and given this great opportunity of water being solidly in the cover decision of COP, for example, how can we take Dr. Iman's messages forward? What is one thing you would say? I would give everyone maybe less than a minute to reflect on that, and it's a very democratic process. If you don't want to answer, that's okay. I'll just ask anyone who wants to reflect on this. But let me just turn then to the audience to see if we have any questions. Okay, we have 3 on this side, but none on, okay, 1 on this side. Okay, this is really tough. But I think the gentleman over here, and then on the last one, and perhaps I'll just take one question also from this side of the room to be fair. But if we don't answer your question, please come and stay and speak to the speakers after, and I'll try to manage this time. Yeah, please introduce yourself. If we can get a microphone over, introduce yourself, ask a question. If you have a particular target speaker you would like to address, let us know. I don't know if you can speak loud because there is a translation going on. We need you to have the microphone. So can we get a microphone? Okay.
Yes, my name is Amgad El-Mahdi. I am the water sector lead at Green Climate Fund. My question, I think, is to Carol and Jim Mark. But I would like, it's a question divided in 2 parts. So I think, Jane, you have presented like the solutions for adaptations and that for the smart water agriculture. I would like to understand like what is actually the key challenge here and opportunities to scale up those solutions within the regions. And in relation to that scale up, I would like to come to Carol. Like you have highlighted also in your presentation, you provide all the basic information that really inform what needs to be done in adaptation, like the agriculture, the loss of employment, but also you show in one of the slides the mitigation actually taking 3 times more than adaptation. So what is actually missing? How we can scale up the finance for the adaptation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amgad. I'm just going to take one more question, just in case it might be similar. We have the gentleman at the very back, I think, who had his hand up first, and we'll ask him to speak, introduce himself.
Hey, my name is Muhammad Ramadan from Swahili in Egypt. My question is about climate smart agriculture. I think that here in Egypt we are facing problem with the water demands because agriculture sector maybe it takes about 85% of fresh water here in Egypt. And applying this technology in Egypt, it will be a good idea. But one of the problems facing us in Egypt is smallholder, maybe the fragmentation of agricultural holdings. So how to deal with this problem? Because to apply maybe new technologies of smart agriculture like drip irrigation and small areas, maybe it will be very costly. To come to maybe to solve the problems, we need maybe to make a union of like stakeholders, like small agriculture, maybe small lands to gather around to build their own unit of new irrigation system. But how to achieve this, considering maybe the mentality of farmers here in Egypt and some areas maybe tough to deal with. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a question on the cost of scaling up this. Also another good lead-up question. I think I'll collect the questions so that then we'll have everyone respond. So this was a question here on this side of the room, just making a geographical balance. And then the gentleman there, and then you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Maya Mhanna from the Ministry of Agriculture in Lebanon, and I think we have all the same concern regarding how to be able to scale up these technologies and to be able to apply it at the farmer level, which is, we have these constraints of financial constraint, of technical constraint, and for example, I wanted to ask Dr. Mahyiddin, all these technique, is it easy for a farmer to apply it so it will not stay only at a pilot project but really to be at a larger scale level? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. There was a gentleman who had his hand up for a while there. I think, yeah, that's, yeah. I would like you to maybe to have a microphone over there.
Abdurrahman Tamim from Palestine. Since Dr. Qasim presentation was in Arabic, I'm going to ask him in Arabic. دكتور قاسم، أنت أخذت بالتأثير على الجراوند ووتر عاملين اللي هو درجة الحرارة ونسبة المطر. كل الموديلز بتقول، وحتى اللي ملاحظينه إحنا بالمنطقة الإيست ميديترينيان، إنه ما في تغير في كميات المطر، في تغير في عدد الأيام الماطرة. يعني في عندنا ستورم ووتر. إذا عندنا ستورم ووتر ودرجات حرارة بترتفع، معناه كل الغطاء النباتي هيتغير، وبالتالي أيضا السلوك للمطر هيتغير. فحابب أسمع رأيك.
Thank you for that question. I think this will be the final one with this gentleman. Yes, at the. Can we have a microphone there? Thank you.
First of all, thank you all for your very informative presentations. My question is mainly to Ms. Carol, but if anyone wants to add on, that would be great. Touching on the effect of climate change on precipitation, you touched on that, but if we can expand a little bit more. We saw that the models, they can predict. I'm thinking about using them to use a rainfall runoff model. So does it make sense to use those percentages from the models we talked about? Or is it gonna be not, especially on a smaller scale? Because I'm talking on catchment scale, for example, the West Bank in Palestine. So does it make sense to use those percentages, adjust the rainfall and use it for a rainfall runoff model? Or it won't make that much sense?
Thank you very much. We have at least 5 questions, but we only have 5 minutes left in the session. So what I would suggest is I would go through every speaker, and I think all of you have been asked a question. You've been targeted by the audience. So I think what I'll do is ask you to address any question that you would like to address, and also then come to this question of what is one thing we should do this year as a regional community to scale up some of this work? Very difficult question. If you choose not to answer that, that's fine. But if you want to address that, that would be great. At the end of it, maybe I'll ask Dr. Eman and Dr. Hakim if they have any last comments. But let's go to the speakers, whoever who wants to speak first. You don't have to address all the questions. And Carol, would you like to take the floor? Yeah.
There you go. Thank you, just to start it up, and thank you for the questions. I'll be really brief because we don't have time, but we can talk later. When you look at global climate models, obviously you get the outputs from models. We use bias-corrected outputs that we have actually taken the raw outputs from regional climate and global models to bias correct them, especially for the purpose for hydrological modeling and agricultural modeling. So the data sets that you'll find on the RCAR knowledge set are bias corrected, especially for this purpose. We've done work on groundwater in Palestine. We work a lot with ACSAD and FAO and others to use it for water resource runoff, groundwater recharge, et cetera, and we can talk bilaterally on that. I'm good. I didn't recognize you with the mask. So thank you for the message, for the question. Look, there's a lot of work being done on climate finance, a lot of accredited organizations out there, and kudos to the Global Climate Fund, the Green Climate Fund for the efforts. It's not getting enough to the countries. I mean, we know with all the significant effort from the GCF, there's 2 projects per year that go to the Arab region, okay? And the GCF provides a great multiplier where MDB, multilateral development banks, bilaterals, other types of even potentially commercial finance can come in to crowd in and complement those sources. And we're even starting to talk with governments about domestic ways to at least have some startup while that work comes in. But what we've seen in some of these mega proposals that are going in, there's a lot of words and not a lot of science, you know? So I think that there's ways to streamline the science with regional specific information like RCAR, with impact assessments, with vulnerability assessments that are targeted to the question rather than these massive proposals. I mean, some of these are like 200 pages for a project. I mean, I don't know if it needs all that. If the question is clear and the science that responds to the question is clear. And then we can go into implementation rather than years sometimes that are taking to prepare on projects. And this is necessary at the assessment stage. It's also very clear KPIs at the end. That's what we've found when we were doing the Regional Climate Finance Forum in September. We had, again, 8 countries propose their own projects. We intentionally did not go to organizations. We intentionally asked the countries, what do you want to prioritize and what are your problems, to hear their side, because we have a lot of capacity in the organizations, maybe not so much in some of the countries. And having them come in and seeing overwhelmingly that almost $1 billion of the projects that came in, compared to only a third, were for adaptation, what they were asking for, while the money is coming in for mitigation, something's wrong. I mean, that if we will have a demand-driven approach to climate finance, we have to listen to what the countries are not, and not where cost recovery might be prioritized. I would say that thanks to the support we had and the collaboration with the Ministry of Water and Resource Irrigation at Cairo Water Week within the context of the Water Action Decade and the policy dialogues, we focused on means of implementation for accelerating action on water, and that's what it's data. It's technology, but it's finance and capacity building also. And in complementarity with the forum that we held with the COP presidency and the high-level champions this year in 2022, our executive secretary, Dr. Dashti, is committed to a climate finance forum on water, climate finance for water that will be happening, and maybe we'll be collaborating with many of our partners here, perhaps as we move that forward, especially with the MENA Climate Week that will be happening in Saudi Arabia later next year.
Thank you, Carol. I think that's also the answer to the other question. I think let's focus on, I think there were at least 2 or 3 questions about how can farmers afford this technology that's recommended, how do we bring it to them, if we can have people address. Jean-Marc, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like probably to bring together at least 3 questions that we had, and start with the maps that Carol showed earlier, in particular of vulnerability, and where she said very rightly that then you bring a lot of socioeconomic factors. And maybe, probably, this is a dialogue that we must continue to have with the climate finance community, because it is very difficult to see the difference between what needs to be done to enhance the sustainability and the productivity, of, in particular, of small-scale farmers, which is the most vulnerable community, and separate this from a climate action. If you are already very vulnerable for reasons of climate, but others also, you need to address this in a holistic way. So I do believe a lot of the solutions are solutions that you would have seen before, and indeed the climate finance community doesn't really like to see that, because then they say, what's specific to me? But we need to have this conversation, because it's really difficult to separate them. Very good question about the technology adapted to smallholder. I cannot consider smallholders a problem. We needed to find solution for the smallholders. And if a technology is not adapted to smallholder, it can be very useful for large commercial farms, and they need to apply them. But it is important also that we find the technologies and the practices that allow smallholder to upgrade their capacity to be a better resilient to climate change, and then to grow and to produce in a decent way. So these things are connected. Indeed, it is important to consider technologies in terms of who these technologies are, who can use these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc. We are a little over time, but I've just been told that lunch is not until 3 p.m. It's not that we're going to stay until then, but if there were any burning desire for any of our panelists to speak, I will just give you a few more minutes. Thank you for your patience. If anybody would like to just address before we close. Okay, Dr. Omar, please.
I just want to answer the questions with regard to the scalability on the farm level or for small holder farming. So actually the main problem of irrigation decisions that it always comes from top to bottom. But actually I think site-specific irrigation decisions is very important, especially that we should utilize advance in technology. There are a lot of low cost and available tools that can be used by farmers and by the extension system, and we should utilize that. So the problem in irrigation and the over-irrigation that has been observed in many regions, because farmers always believe that over-irrigations or more irrigations means more yields, more profitability, and this is the problem. And the irrigation scheduling usually based on generalized regimes that, for example, you can divide your country or your zone to different agroecological zones, and based on each zone you can follow a specific regime. And that's why the decision of irrigation should start from bottom, from the farm level, I mean. And based on the available tools, for example, the thermal imaging based tools that we have presented in our presentation is proximal and the handheld tool. And the resolution and the accuracy is very good. And the results, I mean, we have proved already the concept of this tool as a tool to decide when exactly to irrigate. So I think the scalability and also to apply that on smallholder farming scale, I think based on the science-based tools on the farm level and low-cost tools. So I think with time, I think these transformative actions from decisions from up to bottom, I think will be available and existing everywhere in our region. I think so.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. Efficiency, precision, local context, existing tools. I'm going to give, I think, the floor to Dr. Kassem, who wants to also address the question. Dr. Kassem, you need to put on the microphone.
نعم شكرا على السؤال. حقيقة عملية رشح المياه الجوفية هي أعقد من علاقة بسيطة بين أنه زيادة الهطول المطري معناته زيادة الرشح للمياه الجوفية. حضرتك تحدثت عن زيادة الهطول المطري وزيادة درجات الحرارة، فزيادة الغطاء النباتي. الغطاء النباتي بيخفف الرشح إلى المياه الجوفية لأنه بيحجز المياه على سطح الأرض وبيستهلك المياه، فبيكون الباقي إلى المياه الجوفية دائما بيكون ممكن يكون أقل. هاي واحدة. الشغله الثانيه انه كل النماذج اللي عم تصير هي نماذج سطحيه، ونحن عم نحكي عن المياه الجوفيه، مشان هيك نحن لازم ننتقل للبحث الى المياه الجوفيه. اذا لاحظت انا بالمحاضره لما حكيت انه نحن عم ننفذ توقعات المياه الجوفيه باستخدام نماذج المياه الجوفيه اللي بتاخذ بكل عين الاعتبار المكونات الرئيسيه للمياه الجوفيه. النماذج الحاليه حتى الووتر جاب هذا اللي عرضت نتائجه انا بيعتمد على موازنه مائيه سطحيه، بيحسب كل شيء فيه هطولات مطريه استهلاك من جميع النماذج، اللي ببقي بيزيد عنده ما شلون بده يغطي الحساب بيحسبهم هدول كلهم رشح الى المياه الجوفيه. نحن بالعكس لازم ننتقل الى نماذج المياه الجوفيه نستخدمها نغطي كل مكونات الدورة الهيدرولوجية اللي بيكون في لها تأثير على المياه الجوفية لحتى نعطي نتائج أصح وأدق. بالنسبة للسؤال توقعات ونحن شو رأينا للأبحاث القادمة، فأنا بتوقع إنه نحن لازم نزيد الأبحاث بخصوص المياه الجوفية، نزيد النماذج اللي بخصوص المياه الجوفية لحتى نعكس الخطر الموجود على المياه الجوفية للمجتمع ولصانعي القرار وللجميع، لأنه المياه الجوفية هلا ما حدا شايف عما الخطر اللي نحن يعني القادم علينا نتيجة التغيرات المناخية، واللي هي كمان المزود الرئيسي للمياه لنسبة كبيرة من السكان ولا سيما في الوطن العربي. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qasim. We see there's a real appetite for very specific technical questions, appetite for applying what we've heard today, and also a great appetite for making sure our science translates to climate finance and action. So I think we've had a very broad session. We hope that we've given you food for thought. This is not the last conversation we're going to have this year towards UN Water Conference. So I think I would use this opportunity to bring this session to a close. I also have the happy job of giving you an announcement about food, which is, sorry. Okay, Dr. Hakim, all right, I will. Okay, would you like to, all right, I think it's better to close, not with me, but Dr. Hakim, Dr. Iman. So please take your chance to either one.
So just I'd like to mention one comment from my side, as many questions raised how we can scale up technology and science-based solutions. I'd like to mention that we have to have integration among science-based solution and finance and also policy awareness, capacity building. So to scale up those kind of intervention, we need to have the private sector to start working with farmer. We need to have the private sector to work on land consolidation. A lot of models in Egypt and in different countries where some private sector started to have contractual agriculture with a small farmer and small holders, and they are able to consolidate lands. So we need to have integration, not only science, but we need integrated approach, include executive person to talk with a scientist, and also to have a complete package for all our problems to have good solution to be applied. This is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Sorry, we didn't take our hands because you said that we will come at the end. So let me just say a few words, maybe points directly, and you can say takeaways. Although the scientists are always good in talking about details, so we can come together and say whether the drone should have these kind of blades or this orientation or this kind of engines. But really, when it comes to application, we need to move fast. I will say that the situation is extremely serious, and I'm talking of my own experience. I was representing my country and my continent at COP8 in 2005 in Montreal. And I was very frustrated, sad, and down to go back to COP27 and see the same talks and discussions from 2005. Those who think that climate change may happen or not, they have to realize and wake up from their dreams and know it's happening, and it's happening faster than what we thought. The reports that say some of the cities will be covered by sea, they're just reluctant and not to be too unsure. They pushed it to 2070. They probably have parts of Alexandria and parts of the Delta and parts of Al-Basra and other cities covered well ahead before 2070. And we need to do actions quickly. You're talking about upscaling. Upscaling requires some entrepreneurs come and take those research ideas, transform them into prototypes, and then financiers come and put some finance to allow the small farmer holders to have access to them. And they have to have access to them because our food depends in its 80% of quantity on small farmer holders. These small farmer holders today produce 80% of our food. And if we don't solve their problems, we will have a serious problem. The large ones will not give us food, and we saw how the large ones can produce technologies, but also cannot be sustainable because of that. Either gains or whatever, it's not something that we can rely on, and we see most of the food crisis, where does it come from? So we really need to be thinking of acting fast, getting together, and scale up some of those. And there are Dr. Iman mentioned the modality, but there are forums where they take these entrepreneurs' ideas, and we did support some of the climate smart entrepreneurs and innovation competition for Egypt. We took them to Sharm el-Sheikh to present the cases, and we're willing to take them further to someone that can develop those solutions to small farmer holders. This is an excellent opportunity of bringing these different ideas and thoughts and some of the research, but maybe we need to focus more on really working on adaptation. All the maps, they're nice, but they were needed when people were questioning, is climate change happening? Is it coming from human-based activities, or is it a natural process? I think all these questions have been answered, clearly with no doubt. And what we need to do is that how do we deal with it as it's coming at a faster pace? Thank you.
Thank you very much for these closing statements, the importance of a multi-sectoral approach, not leaving out the private sector, the women and the youth and the smallholders, and everybody needed to take these ideas forward. Let's hope that when we get to COP28, we will not have that same sense of disappointment that you had in 2005. I hope things have changed. I will bring this session to a close now. May I ask the speakers to stay for a group photograph? Lunch will be at 2:30, and dinner will be at 8 at the Conrad Hotel. I've been asked to announce this, and thank you so much for joining us and for your interest, and let's have the next one.